Welcome, everyone, to the Michigan Association of Secondary School Principals podcast series, featuring great discussions, insight, and resources on all things related to education and administration. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the MASSP podcast. My name is Ryan Casey, and we are in the middle of Season 6. Remember, you can listen to all these podcasts and more by heading over to massp.com/podcasts. Today, I am joined by high school leaders all across the state, and we're going to talk about really how has the return to school been. What was hoping to be a normal year, unfortunately, is still dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're just curious to find out what is similar, what is different from last year, what are some new challenges going on, and what are some things that are going maybe hopefully better than expected. Joining us today, we have my first guest is JoLynn Clark, who's the principal at Frankenmuth High School and our Region 4 representative for the board of directors. JoLynn, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Ryan.
Also joining us is Joe Esper, principal at Traverse City West High School and our Region 2 rep. Joe, how's everything in Traverse City?
It's always great in Traverse City. Glad to be here, Ryan. Hello, everyone.
And last but not least, we have Tom Lietz, principal at Utica High School and our Region 9 rep. Tom, thanks so much for being with us this morning.
My pleasure, Ryan. Very happy to be here.
And as I just mentioned, we want to find out, how is the start to the 21-22 school year going? We're about a month in as we are recording this episode right now. So how's it going? What are some things that are similar or different from last year in your buildings as of right now? JoLynn, do you mind starting us off?
No, I'd be glad to. It's really good to be back in person consistently. We started last year with the every other day kind of a model. Then we were in person full. Then, of course, we had the state required shutdown time. And then we were in person full for the remainder of the year after that time, basically our entire second semester. But it's really nice to start out the year being in school all here on the same days and all together. So that's been definitely a plus. As far as similar and different, we just keep plugging along. Academically, things are somewhat back to what they were prior to COVID, because we have regular class periods. We had adjusted our schedule last year, and that created different time frames and some curricular challenges. But it's nice to kind of be back academically where we were, and to have more options, it seems, this year than last, to keep kids in school and keep in-person instruction rolling. So I would say that that's what we've noticed so far.
Great. And how about for you, Joe?
It's been a really good start in Traverse City as well. Things are not all the way back to normal, but it's such a refreshing start this year. We talked a lot as a staff kind of comparing the start this year to last year, which was coming off of the spring 2020 lockdown for all of us. And it's just such a better place. I mean, starting with our staff PD, we actually talked about instruction, and we talked about social emotional learning. It all wasn't just about logistics of how to get kids in the building and get through a school day. We had a lot of in-person instruction last year, only a few periods of remote. We're fully in person this year. The number of students requesting virtual is a fraction of last year. So much so we offered live virtual classes last year. This year it's really just kind of that on-demand, self-paced virtual, because the numbers are so small. But more so during the school day, it just feels like the culture is coming back. I know for all of us across the state, one of the things we love about being high school principals is the job is hard, but there's that fun stuff that happens in high school, the culture piece that kind of gives us, all of us, some excitement, and that's coming back for sure. In Grand Traverse County, our kids are wearing masks in school, but outside of that, we're allowing kids to see each other before class. They can hang out during passing time. They can use a locker this year, which they couldn't last year. They eat in the big high ceiling commons for lunch. We were all in classrooms last year, and when you get outside of the building, you wouldn't know it's a pandemic school year. Outdoor events, obviously no capacities here or most places in the state. We had our big crosstown Traverse City Central West football game last Friday. It's kind of a veterans night, Patriot game. We were able to have veterans there again, fill the stadium with 10,000 people.
Awesome.
We have great bands at both schools, and they got to play. So it's just fun. Like I said, not all the way back to normal, but feels pretty good for the kids and the staff this year.
So it sounds like you guys are getting there. That's great. And what about at Utica High School, Tom?
Yeah, I think you put me last, so I wouldn't have anything new or interesting to say. But yeah, no, Joe and JoLynn had a lot of things. I mean, we started out completely remote last fall and didn't come back in person, and then we came back in kind of a every other day hybrid in person in a block schedule. So being back to normal, that kind of a new normal, a different normal. Has been pleasant. I think the kids are really excited and motivated to be back. I think they like the regularity of the day and the predictability of what they knew. And I think that's been great for staff as well, is knowing that though there might be little changes, we don't see anything that suggests we're going to have as major shifts as we did last year. That terror moving under our feet all the time created a level of anxiety and just challenge that I don't think was expected. Because we didn't know what to expect. But to Joe's point, I mean, I started my morning this morning with a senior sunrise at Utica High School out on our football stadium. We had donuts and Capri Suns for the kids. That good stuff that we get to do to just celebrate kids and be with them and bring a bit of enjoyment back into the school feels real and palpable this year. But even that's a little different, right? We're planning an outdoor homecoming instead of an indoor dance this year. So we're still making adjustments, but those adjustments seem within the range of a degree of normal where they didn't last year. Everything seemed very, very alien to how schools function. One-way hallways, no lockers. You know, we're seeing enough of the normal that those changes are much more palpable this year.
And I saw that sunrise picture on Twitter. That was awesome. So
it was
getting
not a
some of
beautiful
those
sunrise, unfortunately.
Yeah. Joe, you talked about this. So I'll go back to you next. We have different things going on in different counties based on different guidelines and requirements. And so that's one of the reasons we wanted kind of a broad spectrum of different guests on this episode to kind of stretch across the state. Where are you at specifically then with masks? How about your quarantine or your contact tracing procedures? Where are you at with that? And is that different than how you were handling it last year? Joe, if you want to go first, since you kind of touched on this already.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's different than how we handled it last year. It's different this week than it was the first week of school this year. And I think we're all going to experience that as we go through the year. So kind of the general what's going on up here with COVID protocols. I should clarify first off, I said in Grand Traverse County, we're wearing masks. That's not true. We're actually not getting countywide guidance. In Traverse City area public schools, we're currently wearing masks, and the board is kind of doing that a couple weeks at a time. And they look at the local data and they revisit it in board meetings. So our next review is this coming Monday in the board meeting. So it's kind of like anytime kids are indoors, it's a mask mandate, you know. So we had a lot of discussion about how to implement that, but it's really all times indoors. It's not school hours. So like, I know we're all pretty happy that we only have one major indoor sport in the fall season, but volleyball games, like our student sections, have to wear masks, you know. When the kids are actually playing volleyball, they don't have to. So I think what all principals are experiencing is what we're experiencing up here, which is as hard as it was last year, it was consistent throughout the state. The MHSAA was setting kind of standards for athletics, and Health and Human Services was setting standards for the school day. It's very different this year. You know, our county is fighting what a lot of counties are fighting, in that the county health department is very well informed and has some ideas. But then there's some political infighting. The county board up here passed a resolution about what the health department within the county should do and not do. Up in northern Michigan here, the schools are a little more spread out. So we work as kind of a 3-county intermediate school district. And across that intermediate school district, you'll see totally different standards for masking and that type of thing. So our biggest precaution here is masking and sanitation stuff everywhere, wipes and hand sanitizer. But we're not requiring desk spaced, 3 or 5 feet apart this year, or anything like that. And we have not seen a lot of cases in our school yet. I mean, single digits for our high school still at this point in week 3. But there have been some others in the region, and we have plenty of no mask schools in the region that I work in.
And how about for Frankenmuth?
I would concur that one of the big differences is that it's not as consistent of practices everywhere. And so we are currently, we do not have a mask requirement in the building. They are certainly encouraged for students who feel that that is necessary for them, staff that feel that it's necessary for them. So that there's an option to wear a mask, but no requirement to do so. We did a few things on the school side to try to mitigate the spread of COVID, decreasing class sizes from our pre-COVID days, trying to minimize how many students are in a singular classroom at a time. Anytime there are desks involved, they are spaced at least 3 feet. We don't have the capacity to do the 6 feet of spacing, but we can at least get them that 3 feet distance. So we're trying to do some things as normal as possible. We're back to using the cafeteria, back to using the lockers this year that we didn't last year. So that those pieces are nice, but that county-wide piece, it definitely is different by school district as to who's doing what. And it makes it very interesting for participating in partner programs. So we're really well located to have a variety of career and technical education opportunities here in Frankenmuth, and we actually partner with 3 different counties. So we partner with Tuscola, Bay Area Net Career Center, as well as Saginaw Career Complex. And all of those entities have their own requirements and all of that. So it's really made it interesting for processing and trying to keep on top of who's doing what. And as was mentioned, things are constantly changing. Mm-hmm. So the constantly changing within all the different counties also adds and contributes to just kind of what we have to keep up with. I guess on the side of what happens with quarantines and what's happening here right now with quarantines, we have, there's nothing required of students who are vaccinated. And then those who are not have 3 choices. They can do the 10-day quarantine. They can do the 7-day quarantine with a negative PCR test result after day 5, or they can do the antigen testing daily in the morning before school. And as long as that's negative, then they can remain in school, which again is one of those new pieces that we're quite happy to see options for keeping kids in school, where it just isn't an automatic quarantine sentence, and they can stay, attending regularly.
What about Utica, Tom?
Yeah, we're it's Joe referred to the way as a county they're all in different places. We have a little variance in Macomb County. Our challenge is that we have 2 counties on either side of us in Wayne and Oakland that have taken a county-wide stance on masking. So, but that's been an impact on sports and some activities. But the coaches have done a nice job of making sure that if they're crossing over into Oakland County or down into Wayne County or vice versa, that they are adjusting accordingly and respecting the decisions of those county agencies. As a district, we follow the guidelines of our county health department, who have given similar options to what JoLynn described. Our kids are, quarantined if they are not vaccinated, or if they have that option to return on day 8 if they have a negative antigen or PCR test. So that's been an interesting addition. I think one of the challenges we've talked about as principals groups and certainly within our teams is communicating that information to parents and just how much the volume of information that we're giving to parents, the number of dates and options, and that we're constantly trying to not only mitigate the impacts of COVID, but also mitigate the confusion that it creates for parents as we're trying to make sure that they know what they can do and what options they have for their child. Because as JoLynn put it, we want to make sure kids are in school if they can be. That's job number 1. We encourage masking. We don't require it. We encourage students to follow the guidance of the health department in both that and vaccination, but obviously don't require it. And we really follow the leadership of those medical professionals and we'll adjust to the guidance as they give it to us.
What's interesting is I did a similar podcast with middle school leaders. And what's interesting about our middle school leaders in those buildings is certain counties have different mask requirements for like grades K through 6. And then 7, 12 is different. So if you're in a building with 6 through 8, so we were kind of talking about not just the different mask requirements or mandates from their county, but even with vaccinations, because they have a small population of their building that can be at the time could be vaccinated and others can't. So I'm curious, because you're all in buildings with students that are old enough to be vaccinated. And I'll go back to you, JoLynn, because you talked about your tiered approach. You're treating those who are vaccinated different. They have a different quarantine procedure than others who are not. How did you collect that information, and what would you say, if you know that is, what your percentage, if you had to guess, of your kids that are vaccinated?
Well, I think I saw a statistic about school-age students from Saginaw County Health Department indicating that it was over 30% of those who were in the school-aged group that could be vaccinated were. I don't have a specific percentage for our school, but I have been pleasantly surprised because as we've had to go through these conversations and offer those options and say, if you're vaccinated, you don't have to do anything, but they do then have to provide us verification of their vaccine. So I've been pleasantly surprised at how many have that. And that is really a great option for students to not have to be in that quarantine quandary or even to have to worry about it. And I know it was previously mentioned about just the mental strain that not knowing what that next step was going to be, or if we're going to be in school or out of school or remote, or if I was going to get quarantined, that does play a role. And just kids having that peace of mind that they're not going to be required to quarantine is very helpful. So we have had a number who are vaccinated, and we're finding that out as we contact trace and go through this process.
And how about going back to you, Tom? What about Utica?
Yeah, we are very voluntary with that information. So the way we present it when we contact parents is that if they would like to have the option to return sooner, they can volunteer their child's vaccination status and provide that documentation to us. Same with PCR results if they were positive within the last 90 days, which is one of those other options. So we allow it to be voluntary. The big challenge is obviously if they're not, what to do then. And so we've been doing a lot of good work with our teaching team on how to best meet the needs of those students while they're out, and how to make sure education is disrupted as little as possible, and also to make sure that the teacher's ability to educate is also respected, because it's a double-edged sword there. I would say as far as percentages, we feel like we're a little bit ahead of where we've seen the national and county numbers, which say right around where JoLynn said, about 30%. We seem in that ballpark, if not a little ahead of it, and hopefully we'll continue to see that rise, because as JoLynn put it well, I think it reduces that concern of the child. It allows a great deal more freedom and openness, and for them to feel like they're not constantly at risk of being put into quarantine, whether they're an athlete or in a theatrical performance or whatever they're working towards. That they're not going to, have to be removed from that opportunity for any time. I mean, I even know my 7 and 9-year-old who are here in Macomb County are clamoring for that shot to be available for kids under 12. So, I think and I hope that will continue to rise.
And what about students in your building, Joe?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty similar to Tom and JoLynn. We don't track at the site vaccination rates or anything. Anecdotally, we know a pretty large number of our high school students have taken advantage of that. And really, we see a lot of it with our students that are deeply involved in activities like these other two principals have. Our athletes don't have that stress of, I'm going to wake up tomorrow and find out I was sitting next to the wrong kid in class and I have to miss a week and a half of volleyball or cross country or anything like that. Last year we had kind of a system worked out with timelines based on the MHSAA tournaments for each thing that, kids that wanted to go remote to try to avoid quarantine leading up to big events could do that. We don't do that this year because, kids and families have the option to have that discussion about getting vaccinated. So it's been a little hard to track data in the county. One, it's hard to get to it. And then the age bands kind of cross over. Like you talked about middle school having that wide age range of kids. I haven't seen high school specific data because all of our kids are eligible. We don't really know how many have it. We estimate it's more than, well north of half here, but we're just really not sure.
So when you came back to school this year, as you were planning for your students and your staff, I know a lot of schools were putting their main focus on learning loss. Some were choosing to focus on social emotional learning. Others were kind of bringing back, building culture back up to where it needs to be. I'm just curious from each of you, what was your focus for your students and staff this year? And Tom, you want to go first?
Sure. Our focus at Utica High was really, we put a lot of, I mean, it's a little all of the above for all of us, I'm sure, but my message to my team at the beginning of the year was what I wanted to not see the first week of school. I wanted to see kids excited and engaged to start a school year back. I wanted to be conscious of the anxieties with doing that, both for staff and students, because whether we want to talk about it or not, we most of these kids have not had a regular start to year. And have not had consistent learning practices in well over a year. So we wanted to establish some of those norms. We wanted to make sure we hadn't lost any of that culture. I think what we were least worried about, and this may sound arrogant, was the learning loss, because I feel that narrative, there's certainly some truth to it. And we're worried about that with our at-risk students, our ESL students, special ed students, et cetera. But for our general ed students, we felt like they had a pretty good year. We felt like that year was probably commensurate to where their colleagues and peers were around the state. And what we wanted to focus on was moving forward. We knew we'd have to accelerate some learning, but we weren't going to get tangled in that narrative that kids lost a year, because they didn't. For all the things that they lost, there were many gains. There were skills learned. There were things that we talked about. We honored the teachers' work and said, what were the things that were really, really successful last year that you can bring forward from that remote or hybrid learning into our in-person learning? And how can we particularly leverage those to accelerate that learning with our students who are facing more challenges than others? Let's talk about what we've done well. Let's build on those wins that we've had, and let's honor the work that's done. And I think that goes into that sustaining and building culture. It also is responsive to some of those social emotional pieces, that I think Joe referred to earlier. And it's really all of that together, you're going to get the growth and the acceleration that you're looking for. But I refuse to get caught into that narrative. And maybe that's from a place of privilege with where I am and who I work with. But we've got a pretty diverse group of kids, both in needs and ethnicity and race and language acquisition. And we feel pretty good about where we are and where we're going based on the good work of our teachers and the ability to leverage those relationships to move kids forward.
I think that speaks volumes of your trust for your teachers and the programs you have in place. So that's really awesome to hear. Joe, do you mind sharing next?
Yeah, so like I mentioned kind of in the intro, launching the school year was great because we didn't talk just about logistics and protocols and moving in the building. So it's been excellent in Traverse City this year. Our three goals as a building line up with the district's three goals this year and line up with the same goals at Central High School, which is the other big high school in Traverse City. So we did a lot of work together to start the school year. There were longer versions of this, but in my head, it was really about, we did a lot of work around relationships, around rigor, and around readiness. On the relationships piece, we had Dr. Michelle Borba do a keynote district-wide. And a lot of great work came out of that, like just the little things we can do in our interactions with kids on a daily basis to spread positivity. And so we've kind of been collecting from staff positive quotes for the morning announcements, and a lot of staff have put out welcome mats for kids, and just that recognition of what a lot of these other principals have said, the stresses kids have gone through, and just making this more of a welcoming place, and not having as many protocols for them to follow this year, I think helps with that, because it's less of adults having to redirect them about things all day and a little more interacting with them. But that rigor and readiness piece is really coming back to the surface, especially after, what are we in now, like our third year that's been touched by COVID. We can't forget about the academics with these kids. And on Wednesday this week at West, we gave out our academic awards for last year. We had regular grades and GPAs all of last year. And one of the big things I thought about as these seniors came across the stage was like this time warp of, they were sophomores, they were just getting into the hard AP classes on the front end of that and everything. And like now they're at the end of the pipeline. They've just kind of been warped through there, and making sure they have everything they need to be ready for the next steps, a big priority this year.
Awesome. And how about at Frankenmuth, JoLynn?
Absolutely. I agree with both of the, what Joe and Tom have both said. I think similarly to Tom, we took a very culture-oriented approach from the beginning. I completely concur on the overstatement of learning loss, and we hear a lot about this in the media, but it is not what we've seen if I look at the actual data from last year. So that learning focus is important, but it definitely wasn't our priority as we started this year. And we had a happy accident happen in Frankenmuth. We made a shift to 1-to-1 where we are giving district provided devices. We did bring your own device previously and found a lot of issues that occurred when we had everybody bringing different devices. So we decided to go 1-to-1. The high school's devices weren't ready for rollout in that first week of school. And so it allowed us really to step back and make the priority those relationships, those connections, reestablishing what it is to be in a normal school pattern. And it just gave us kind of permission to make that the focus for the first few days, at least, before we jumped into content. And sometimes you just need that permission to be able to let go of, hey, here's how I start my school year, and this is my normal routine. So that was extremely important. We have started last year as a district with a Capturing Kids' Hearts program initiative. And so we are continuing that this year. And the Saginaw County ISD also invested in Character Strong education. And so we have a couple different, programs that we're able to draw multiple SEL focused activities from per grade level. And so we're using that as one of our school improvement, MyKIP. One of our goal areas is in the use of these programs and facilitating opportunities for students to really explore and to engage on a socio-emotional level. We also spent some time in our back to school sessions on diversity, equity, and inclusion, because that seems a very important cornerstone to the culture piece for any school at this point, because of the divisiveness kids have experienced, kids have seen, kids have witnessed in the world over the past year and a half. It's just important to kind of talk about we're more alike than we are different in many, many ways, and bringing that kind of back all together and how we can be a cohesive school culture, climate, community here, which again, a lot easier to do without all of the mandates and requirements that we have seen in the past.
I'll stay with you, JoLynn. So I have a final question, just a quick one, really. If in terms of staffing, is there anything your building still needs in order to be or remain successful? So is it maybe you're taking advantage of those additional funds for mental health professionals? Now that you're doing district provided 1-to-1 at Frankenmuth, maybe it's technology specialists, virtual or hybrid additional staffing. If there's one thing your building needs, what would it be?
Well, we did have a addition with the mental health professional at the elementary level, and we previously did not have anybody filling that role there. So that was absolutely wonderful to have that additional support. Our technology is in-house, and we are blessed with a team that is just dedicated. And that's from full-time employees too. They have hired some student employees who are amazing workers and have helped us roll out this 1-to-1. I honestly, staff-wise, don't know that there's anything we need other than if I could clone myself or, get somebody else who's going to help out with all of the bits and pieces that keep rolling our way as a result of the COVID portion, so that I can spend more time, force myself as it is, but I in a good way, to get out to those senior sunrises, to get out into the classrooms, to do those things that we became principals to do. I did see recently an area school around here posted for a contact tracing specialist, that they are hiring somebody to manage their contact tracing, which honestly, if they can find somebody to do that, more power to them, because it really is exceptionally time consuming and does take us away from the instructional leadership that most of us have worked really hard to set in motion in our buildings.
Joe, how about you? One thing your building could possibly use?
Staffing wise, I feel like this is going to be our biggest focus for the next 5 years. We've been super fortunate teaching wise. I can't believe the degree to which our teachers have stuck around through 3 crazy years touched by COVID. And we're fully staffed on the teaching side, but our kitchen staff, our custodial staff, our bus drivers, our technology folks have not been fully staffed. I mean, not just to start this school year, but in quite a while. And it weighs on those people and it impacts, I think, every facet of the building. And I think kids feel
Absolutely.
it. So we do what we can to make sure those people that we have feel valued. And we want them to keep coming back and doing that work in school. And hopefully as things change nationally and more people get back to work, maybe that will help us out too. But that non-instructional piece right now is just it's just really a burner for people. And we hope that improves over time.
Yeah, that's a great one to highlight that still impacts the building greatly. And finally, how about for Utica?
Yeah, I think right now our biggest challenge, like Joe said, is just teaching staff. We had a teacher who 2 weeks into school resigned or retired for good reasons, and there are lots of reasons why that happens. But I think this is going to be something that is, it's certainly worsened by the pandemic and the stresses and the challenges, and that with the combination of so many teachers being within that 5-year window of retirement age with the years bought in our generation of educators, that ratio of teachers leaving to what's coming in from ed programs is going to be a challenge. We were lucky to have somebody in our program who's finishing up and is going to be a certified teacher soon and could jump into that role. Not everybody is going to be that lucky. And in talking to the principals in my county, whether it's paras, teachers, secretarial staff, we're still understaffed, a person and a half as far as our clerical staff. We're all going to be facing these challenges. I know from school systems, we adjusted our entire schedule this year as a district to accommodate what we knew was going to be a lack of bus drivers. And we're not the only district doing that. And I think that those challenges with staffing are so systemic right now because of just a lack of whether qualified or interested candidates that we're going to really need a concerted effort, I think, at the state level to incentivize the idea of going into public education. I mean, what was the National Guard in one state is driving buses. I don't know how we've gotten to this. Well, I do know how we've come to this point, but it's still amazing to me that we're here. And I think to Joe's point, that's something that's not going to go away for a few years. So I think like many people, we are struggling with bits and pieces, but those bits and pieces are about to become much larger and continue to grow as problems unless there's some systemic action taken to curb that.
I couldn't agree with that anymore. So that's a great one, I think, to end on as well. So I appreciate all of your time. For everybody listening, these are 3 awesome leaders at the high school level that not only represent MASSP, but represent you all across the state. So thank you so much for your time. I will post their Twitter info and all their contact information when we send out this episode within the next couple of weeks. So JoLynn, Joe, Tom, thanks again so much for all your time. I really appreciate it. Remember, everybody listening, as I mentioned earlier, you can head over to massp.com/podcast or head over to Apple Podcasts to listen to this and more. We are about 4 episodes into season 6 with plenty more on the way. So thanks for listening and have a great day.